Nation very warmly welcomes Honorable Minister of Defence, Srimati Nirmala Sitharaman, for the release function of 2 VIF task force reports. Make in India through Indigenous Research and Development by DRDO/Industry and Credible Cyber Deterrence in Armed Forces of India. May I now kindly request the Honorable Raksha Mantri, Dr. Arvind Gupta, Director VIF, Admiral Raman Puri, and General Devendra Kumar, the 2 task force heads, to kindly take their seats on the dais. I now request Nikhilji from Vivekananda Kendra to do the invocation prayer.
भद्रं कर्णेभिः शृणुयाम देवाः भद्रं पश्येमाक्षभिर्यजत्राः स्थिरैरङ्गैः सुष्ठुवागं सस्तनूभिः व्यशेम देवहितं यदायुः ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः.
May I now request Dr. Gupta to present an Angvastram and a VIF memento to the Honorable Raksha Mantri. I now hand over the proceedings to Dr. Gupta.
Namaskar. Honorable Raksha Mantri ji, Lieutenant General Devendra Kumar ji, Vice Admiral Raman Puri, distinguished guests, members of the task forces, members of the diplomatic corps, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure for us to welcome the Honorable Raksha Mantri, Srimati Nirmala Sitharaman, to the VIF for the release of 2 of our task force reports titled Credible Cyber Deterrence in Armed Forces of India and Make in India through Indigenous Research and Development by the DRDO/Industry. We are grateful to you, ma'am, for agreeing to our request and finding time from your very busy schedule to be here with us today. The entire country is proud that Honorable Nirmala Sitharaman ji is the first woman in India to hold the highly prestigious portfolio of Defense Minister in the Cabinet. She is well known to all of you, but just brief words of introduction. Before becoming the Raksha Mantri, she was Minister of State, Independent Charge in Ministry of Commerce and Industry, and Minister of State in Ministry of Finance. She was a member National Commission for Women during 2003 and 2005. By profession, she is an economist and a political and social worker. She holds an MA in Economics and MPhil from Jawaharlal Nehru University. I would like to express my gratitude to Lieutenant General Retired Devendra Kumar ji and his team of experts for having brought out the report on cyber deterrence for the armed forces. Likewise, my grateful thanks to Vice Admiral Retired Raman Puri and his team of experts who worked hard on the task force on indigenous R&D. In fact, the Raman Puri task force is continuing with its work and will most likely produce another set of recommendations in a few months' time. Friends, you would agree that cyberspace is emerging as a new arena of warfare. Technology has profoundly impacted how the wars of future will be fought. Cyber power is becoming indispensable to war fighting. The armed forces need cyber defenses as well as cyber deterrence capabilities. The government has set up a defense cyber agency recently. This is a much laudable step. The cyber task force identifies 7 pillars of cyber power which need to be equally strong. And these include cyber policy and strategy, cyber doctrine, cyber organization, human resources for cyber power, cyber technology, cyber deterrence capabilities, and legal framework. The task force makes detailed recommendations on how each of the 7 pillars can be developed and strengthened further. The task force report on energizing Make in India through indigenous R&D by the DRDO and industry has gone into details of the indigenization process and identified gap areas. It recommends the reform of defense planning processes and suggests restructuring of higher defense organization. There is a need to evolve a meaningful long-term integrated perspective plan which would help future programs and projects to build indigenous defense capability. The way forward for strengthening defense R&D is through Special Missions Program. Integrated Guided Missiles Development Program is an example. The task force identifies certain critical programs such as conventional submarine, hypersonic missile systems, integrated ballistic and cruise missile systems, a series of aviation programs, AI-enabled autonomous systems, cybersecurity systems, etc., in which indigenous research capacities need to be built urgently. Madam, soon 5G technology, which underpins the era of the Internet of Things, is going to be unveiled the world over. India must be careful and while adopting imported 5G technologies, which would have many security vulnerabilities. We must develop indigenous capabilities in critical technologies. India has all the resources to do so, but somehow we have not been able to use them to promote indigenization of critical strategic and critical other technologies. I would now request the Honorable Defense Minister to kindly release the task force reports. Thereafter, I would request General Devendra Kumar and Vice Admiral Ramanpuri to briefly introduce their respective task force reports. And thereafter, I would request the Honorable Raksha Mantri to say a few words. So may I now request the Raksha Mantri ji to kindly release the task force report. General Devendra Kumar.
Honorable Raksha Mantri ji, distinguished audience, General Vij, Mr. Sibal, Mr. Shekhar Dutt, and my team members, particularly their spouses, it's good to have you with us today on this release of the report. My grateful thanks also to Raksha Mantri for sparing the time to attend this particular function. It gives us it encourages us firstly, and secondly, it confirms to us the resolve to get on to cybersecurity and provide the necessary deterrence to our likely adversary. I would also like to thank the Director, VIF, and General Sawhney for assigning this subject to me, which is very dear to me, and also helping me in selecting a balanced and highly experienced team. It's rare to have a task force with over 400 years of experience, wisdom, both in combat and policy making. Each member of the task force is an ace by himself and has contributed sizable to the report. It is largely because of their contribution and stimulating informed discussions that we have for the first time an India-centric document dealing with all aspects of acquisition and application of cyber power for effective cyber deterrence in the recommended policy, strategy, and doctrine. The task force is confident that implementation of the recommendations made would fill a strategic gap in India's security architecture and provide the base for creation of a cyber command. The task force deliberated a great deal on the situation when the government decided to have a defense cyber agency. There was a feeling that maybe we have been sidetracked. But then we discussed amongst ourselves and came to a conclusion that we'll have to reorient our study to accommodate Defense Cyber Agency and also include how to make them operational in a very quick time frame. And therefore, we provided a positive frame of reference to this particular situation. The deduction that we made was that the formation of the Defense Cyber Agency be taken as an intermediate step towards the formation of a full-fledged cyber formation or cyber command over the next 3 years, and concurrently develop capabilities for full-spectrum information warfare with cyber at its core. The task force accordingly decided it will follow 2 approaches. One, that would concentrate on the capability build-up of our armed forces. 2, suggested integration with the national cybersecurity architecture at a micro level. The start point was, what are the threats that India faces, what is the kind of information environment that we have, and what kind of defensive or offensive operations India would like to, or India will have to take. And I'll give you a small idea of the threats, though that was a very major portion of our study. First thing that we got to realize is that the threats are transforming from disruptive to destructive. And that's a very major happening which is going to take. India is a much sought after target for cyber interventions, including espionage and probing missions. The last Cisco report puts the cyber interventions from 250 to 500,000 in a day in case of India. This is an important thing. Our platforms, our military platforms are vulnerable and require immediate corrective measures. And perhaps we are trying to still find answer to this. Possible collusion between China and Pakistan in cyber domain. And that's probably one of the worst scenarios that India could face. Having done the threat analysis, we decided that we will take the study in 2 parts. Firstly, India required an integrated national cyber doctrine with cybersecurity aspects dealt with civil authorities and cyber power by the armed forces. Now, this is the first time that we are dividing between the 2 users of the cyber affairs. Our task force will concentrate on military aspects, including building capabilities for offensive operations, cyber deception, cyber exploitation, and probing missions. Accordingly, we took a 7-pillar approach, which is a very simple way of explaining a very technical subject. The first pillar was policy and strategy. Now, you have a policy, you need a strategy, then you need a doctrine. So the next thing is on the Indian Armed Forces doctrine. After you have a doctrine, you have to materialize the doctrine by way of an organization, and that's the next pillar. And you can't do anything without a human resource, and that's on number 5 pillar. Technology is something that, again, we need very badly, and integration of all this into a system that can respond. And finally, international engagement and also the legal framework. Each of these have been covered in our report in section 2 to 8 and recommendations made. Section 9 deals with supporting institutions, policies and infrastructure. Major recommendations are 2. National Cybersecurity Commission under the Prime Minister on the lines of the Atomic and Space Commissions, and a second is the Cyber Command. The section 10 covers the integration with the National Cybersecurity Architecture and positioning of Defense Cyber Agency ensuring least turbulence. Finally, Section 11 gives the action plan and the timelines. Cyber power is offense dominant, requires unconventional approach in almost all dimensions. You would notice these in the report. My submission is that we have no alternative, as the stakes are very high, wherein the national and the human security are involved. The story, therefore, is complete, and we are positive that nothing has been left for want of thought and effort. However, any suggestions are welcome. Its timely implementation will provide the base for a dedicated cyber command formation and an effective cyber deterrence. This will include demonstration capabilities and will employ them proactively. To conclude, the threat is real, present 24/7, with the whole nation as a battlefield, an attacker located anywhere in the world and untraceable. Time is at a premium, with our strategic window closing very fast. We have a long way to go. We must start right away, and it will always remain a work in progress. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kumar. And now may I request Admiral Ramanpuri to make his brief remarks.
Honorable Raksha Mantri, Srimati Nirmala Sitharaman ji, Director VIF, Dr. Arvind Gupta ji, General Devinder Singh, ladies and gentlemen. The inspiration for our study on Make in India through Indigenous research and development comes basically from two factors. Firstly, it is a fact that while we are metamorphosing from a country with global clout, we remain today the largest importers of armament, which situation needs to be reversed and in any case is unaffordable in the long run. It has many other connotations in the foreign policy affairs, in our financial management, and so on. The second fact is that we believe that Make in India is only possible through indigenous research and development. Through the buy or buy and make route, it is just not possible. Because technology transfer is an elusive term. It never happens. Neither it is in test. It is difficult to transfer because the technology transfer takes place at a level where the underlying technologies remain opaque, and it is not in the interest of either the OEMs or their respective countries to transfer any technology to anybody. They like you to be dependent on them. But in this regard, I must at the very outset mention some very positive steps that have been taken in the recent past by the Honorable Raksha Mantri in ensuring the long-awaited FOC for the LCA aircraft Mark 1A and its upgradation of its production to 16 aircraft per year, so that I personally am quite hopeful that this aircraft will be manufactured in large numbers and relieve us of a large load of imports that take place in this area. Many more programs can then also follow from this particular program that has come about. To progress our study, in the VIF, we organized a number of roundtables to understand the root causes that lead to such large imports, and accordingly we drew up our terms of reference. Broadly, it emerged that despite the introduction of the indigenous design, development and manufacture category in the DPP 116, our current processes only lead us to the buy and make route, which at best result in license production with very little meaningful transfer of technology, as I've already mentioned. It further emerged that broadly we need to examine two factors. Firstly, how we set our requirements for the R&D and industry, and secondly, the processes in which these requirements are met. This report covers the first aspect. As the director mentioned, our study continues. We have examined in this report the setting up of requirements to the R&D and industry for them to be able to deliver in the time frames in which the equipment or systems are required. We then examined we then undertook a study of, in parallel, of two aspects. First, the foreign country models of major arm producing countries, together with the models, the case studies on our own major systems which have been successful. Things like systems like Akash, systems like LCA, systems like IGMDP, which have been successful programs. There is a talk about time frames, but all that I would like to mention is nowhere in the world are first of type systems of this magnitude ever produced in the time frames that we set out for them. They easily take 15, 20, 25 years and even more. We can go across the GEO reports of the US Armed Forces, where practically every major system has had major cost and time overruns. It in essence has emerged that the major programs and projects require considerable lead time for their design, development, integration, trials, and production, so that they can meet not only our requirements in the strategic or the operational time frames. If we try to meet these requirements in the tactical time frames, which to my mind are 2 to 3 years or maybe at best 4, major systems cannot be produced. And therefore, we felt that we need a system by which we are able to project our major requirements in the time frames that these systems required for their development to become relevant in which will be largely your strategic or tactical time frame. The long-term integrated perspective plan, therefore, in our view, needs to be drawn up in the scope of a capability and security investment program. Currently, it is largely, to put it very bluntly, a wish list of the 3 services of what they think they would like to have in a certain time frame, without assigning any resources or having any plan as to when those requirements or those items that they think they will require will be put in the procurement cycles or the development cycles. Therefore, the study then goes on into some details of the processes within which such a long-term integrated perspective plan should be evolved, and this would call for an upgradation of the defense planning process, and we suggest the restructuring of the higher defense organization itself for the purpose. It may not be possible to do it without this measure, because drawing up a long-term perspective plan is an interagency effort. It is not the effort of a service or of a particular ministry even. It is only after strategic guidance documents are made out that we can issue planning guidelines for the development of the force structure of the armed forces, which should ideally result in an integrated force development guidelines. These are standard in all major countries that we have studied. Next, I feel that while such restructuring will necessarily take a lot of time, in our system it will take time because a number of agencies have to get together, have to agree to a process. So such a system will take time for the examination of the changes necessary to restructure our planning processes. However, today we opine that as a result of the programs and projects we have taken up, successful or otherwise, it should be possible to meet a number of our major requirements through the Make in India process, but it would be in the strategic and operational time frames, which time frames are 10, 15, 20 and maybe even 25 years. Time frames of 10 to 15 years and more. For force multipliers required in the tactical time frame, that is about 2 to 3 years, we should carefully analyze with the research and development and the industry our technology readiness levels in these areas. For example, if we have got a particular EW system and we want it to cover a larger band of frequencies, it is possible to do it in a much quicker time frame because the underlying technologies should largely be available in the country. So if we can get to know which particular area we need to develop and which areas are already known to us and how long will it take to develop, we should be able to take a decision on whether to buy and make or import. And this requires a careful analysis. I dare say that at least in my time, such analysis didn't take place. We may again, however, emphasize that where programs are not moved in the strategic operational time horizons, the buy and make route very often becomes inevitable. And the cost of such delayed decisions are huge. As I said, they are not just financial, they are not just the fact that our capabilities become vulnerable, they are also, they impact on our foreign policies and other matters which I think this audience will well understand. A shining example of such a capability development has been our own integrated guided missile defense project, development project. It is as a result of this project taken some 30 years ago that today we can say we are self-reliant in practically all our missile, not just the missile, the supporting sensor, communication, all those needs, we are self-sufficient in ourselves. So we need perhaps many more such large programs to come up and be funded so that in course of time, at least in course of 10 to 15 years, we would be self-reliant in most of the technology, most of the systems that we need in those times. Keeping these aspects in view, the task force has identified certain critical programs in which indigenous capabilities need to be built, such as these have been enumerated by the director, and I will only just repeat them very quickly, such as the conventional submarines, the nuclear attack submarines, hypersonic missile systems, major aviation programs with series of aviation projects, AI-enabled autonomous systems, information warfare systems and sensors, especially leading to the shaping of mass perceptions, a new area of warfare today. A large advanced material development program, because materials basically underlines all major systems. If we want hypersonic missiles, we will need materials which will withstand very high temperatures and yet have retained some properties. So therefore, this effort requires to be enlarged by leaps and bounds in this country. The number of laboratories working in this area, in my view, are very small. They hardly have, maybe, all told, there will be about 1,000, 1,500 people working there. This is very small. The report makes some other enabling recommendations on the evolution of requirement specifications, how we should evolve them, modeling and simulation for aid to decisions level at all decision-making levels, be it at the level of making your LTIPP, or be it at the level of deciding what will be the specifications of the systems that we want. At all levels, there should be relevant modeling and simulation should take place. And in this area, I would say even the private industry in this country has advanced quite a lot. For decisions level at all levels, and changes to our procurement policies, especially the e-procurement policies. I believe that e-procurement, where we need confidentiality, is no-go. Today, with the type of policies enforced for issuing tenders, for issuing many other procurement-related issues like RFPs and all that, easily give away our intentions, at times our capabilities, the directions we are going to develop in, and what is the stage of our development. If I order a particular test equipment, it easily tells everybody as to what I am going to do with that test equipment. So this should be known through non-disclosure agreement only to persons from whom we are going to deal with. And therefore, I feel that this, although I don't, whatever the GFR may say and whatever our procurement policies may say, I believe this requires a small change. So gentlemen, this has been largely the scope of our report. I hope this will make some difference to the method in which we give our requirements to our R&D and our industries. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Admiral Puri, for introducing the report. Now, may I invite the Honorable Raksha Mantri to kindly make her remarks.
Good afternoon. I first of all thank Dr. Gupta and also the two heads of the task force which have come up with very relevant and purpose-serving reports. There may be still parts of it which has to be finalized. Never mind, I would thank Admiral Raman Puri and also General Kumar for having spent their time deriving from their experience of having long served the armed forces. These are the kind of inputs which the ministry would definitely benefit from. Without even having had a look at the pages, I can only say that I will personally, as much as also the ministry, will give their best of times to go through it and even invite the task force to come and give a briefing to the officials. I'll sound rather hollow if I say these are the reports which will have a great place of importance in the ministry, but this is what we would want so that we can do some meaningful and well within time decision making. As regards the cyber security and also eventually looking at having a command which can take care of the cyber area of activities, because today that together with space has acquired an kind of importance which I can't probably define in words. The growth of the importance of these two areas is just not tractable by all of us. The speed with which technology moves in these two domains is just not possible for any authority or any government to be abreast of. So you're always doing the catching up game. But in the meanwhile, the emphasis that has to be laid in terms of the disruption or the destructive potential is just so high that you're not just planning to build firewalls, but you have to do everything that it takes to not only just ensure that you're safe, but also you're on the top of what you've got with you. So these are areas in which the dynamics change almost every day. And how much ever investment you do to do the catching up, it's always going to be inadequate. But that doesn't mean that it should deter us from even moving forward. I think we should be so flexible and recognize that as much as you have your conventional armed forces and their priorities for operational readiness, these are two areas in which you have so many different cross connections and multidisciplinary importance which have to be placed. And therefore, I look forward to having the report on the cyber deterrence, which will help eventually to move towards having a command, which will draw on the expertise on not just those who are in the field of cyber technology, but also because eventually it has to help in the three forces being able to be on the top of things. We need all of them to work together in order that we get the best and optimal results and synergy between all of them. So on the cyber, it's not deterrence, as General Kumar very clearly said. We're not just looking at deterrence, but we're also looking at the way in which we have the capacities, institutional capacities built. So that's an area in which a lot more listening to, a lot more getting into details will have to happen, not just in the MOD, but also with the NSA, with also other ministries which have directly contributed towards India's capacities in this. So I look forward to having the briefing on, also going through the report, and then carrying it forward towards what can be acted upon. The other report, of course, is something on which some activities already happened. Although even in cyber, I would say some activities happening in each of the ministries, but in a very scattered fashion. What we want through this report is to have a comprehensive framework through which all this can be put together, and also with a futuristic way we can move forward. So if that's the approach on the cyber, on the indigenous R&D, there's already something which is happening, some which is being driven by the ministry, and some, I'm glad to say, outside of the government. And if outside of the government R&D is happening, the interface that we have with the private sector on this has resulted in many of us being absolutely surprised by the extent to which a private sector has really invested in R&D. The popular perception is private sector doesn't probably invest in R&D. They are very good in scaling up their production, wanting to have quick turnover and so on. And except for probably pharmaceuticals, India's culture of investing for R&D, people wouldn't be able to produce numbers. But I'm glad to say here, and I'm extremely pleased to say here, that R&D for the purposes of defense is actually quietly but significantly moving forward. And in that, I would want to touch upon the point which was mentioned, particularly on materials research. When we were looking at some of the private sector which had imported technology to make guns, whether it's Korean technology or German technology, some of them have started producing as well. The best part of the story was not just they were producing, but they have invested in R&D for the materials which have to be fine-tuned and materials which probably we don't even mine in India. But they're sourcing it from wherever they have to source it, but refining it further in such a way that the raw material required for high-caliber gun manufacturing are going to be available in India. I've taken a random example, but there are enough number of private sector people who tell you that for this purpose we've already started doing R&D for this particular material, this particular input and so on. So you're in the field, I'm sure you're able to put your finger on who I'm suggesting, what kind of investment which is happening, but these are happening nevertheless. But does that mean that government doesn't do anything about it? Not at all. One of the things that I want to put before you is, whilst recognizing that we are the third largest in terms of spending on defense procurement, the point that has been mentioned that we cannot afford to go on this route, we need to have a lot of them manufactured in India, we have definitely taken concrete steps. Whether sufficient or not is disputable, but we have taken quite a lot of steps, even as we announced the defense production corridors. What we did was to ensure that when the corridors were made, there was quite a lot of looking into as to why should it be located in a place and not in another place. The primary selection criteria were definitely on areas where you already have industry, either private or public sector industries present who were doing traditional defense-related manufacturing. Whether that was idle way or not, we just looked at where their presence was, whether they were optimally producing anything, whether they have chance for modernization, whether they would want to be completely closed down and we look at something else. All that was factored in. So with that factored in, we went into areas where there was already presence of private and public sector, and that's where we launched the corridor. But post-launching, what we did was to make sure those in the three services who actually do the procurement, keeping the long-term perspective plan in mind. I'd like to underline the fact that the long-term perspective, existing long-term perspective plan in mind, we made sure the officials, the procurement concerned officials from the three forces would go to those areas of the corridor, sit in those nodal points. We facilitated small, medium, large industries which had any inclination of wanting to do anything in defense production, even if they were producing already or they were wanting to consider producing for defense. All of them were brought together, each for its own node. And discussions based on what the existing long-term plan is and how much of that can be serviced by Indian industry, if not today, in the next few years. And even before doing this, we ensured that we had thoroughgoing discussions in the ministry with the three services, saying existing long-term perspective plan might be whatever it is, how are we looking at if we were to refine it, if we were to take it forward. After all, because what we have in our hand is a few years old, much before we formalize the new LTPP, is there a way in which we can also already throw some bits into it and go to the industry? And when we did this, the private sector industry it was, which responded with a sense of shock, pleasant surprise, saying, will the defense ever come to us to say, this is what we want, are you in a position to produce? If you want to shift from the core activity that you're doing or from keeping the core activity, if you still want to tweak somewhat and start producing this, here are we who's going to tell you what quality we need, what kind of standards you have to meet, and what kind of quantities we might need for the next 10 years. So that the moment you have proven that you have the capacity to provide that quality and that standard, we place the order with you. So that the Indian industry for sure knows that if they have proven capabilities to the standard that's the armed forces expectation, we'll not be deceptive to say, you may exist, but we are not very confident, but we'll go for an instant purchase, buy or, take the technology and make in India. No. Our priority would be make sure to have officials work together with the industry to meet up with the quality standards, and only then, if you're convinced, you're going to place the order. So now, in a way, without stating it so much, the long-term perspective plan itself is becoming a rolling long-term perspective plan. We are not just having one milepost and the next milepost after a couple of years and say this is now long-term. We are keeping it rolling. so that the industry can also feel that they are part of what is getting put into the long-term plan from the point of view of what is obtainable within India. And in this, one of the most important thing is, rightly as was pointed out, you may have all the plan, but do you have the money? We've ensured, of course we have not reached the end of the story yet, but I have made sure that I talk with the finance ministry to make sure that defense no longer will get a budget, does its expenditure for this year, and sometimes it so happens that what you budgeted for doesn't happen in that year. The money goes back unutilized to the consolidated fund, and the next year when this matures, you're still grappling with, no, but I didn't plan for this one this year, or I had to drop something else because of the patchy way in which we plan. We've made a clear demand to the finance that once allocated, it shall not go back, and the committed expenditure, whichever year that may happen, will happen from this fund, which probably will get accumulated, whichever way they would look and define it. It shall keep accumulating, and the moment that it was budgeted for, which didn't happen in year X, but happens in X plus 5th year, the money is there for you. So we have made sure that this negotiation with finance is happening, and I can confidently say that there is a positive response from the finance, but of course we've got too close to the, let's say, the election time, and we'll have to wait for the new government to come. But this is something which I think there's clear understanding between the finance ministry and us, and therefore I only can see it happening at least in the near future. If that happens, the usual problem of defense forces, that we planned for it, but I'm sorry we don't have the resources, making the public, at least thinking public, wonder how can this situation happen? You plan for something, but you don't have the money. How is that? Majority of the times it doesn't arise like that. And the recent example of claims being made that there was no money for me to buy something, I don't see as a reason. But aside from that, most often when you do take your negotiations that far, it means you've already put the money into the kitty. So it really cannot be a situation where you say, having done all this, years of negotiation, I don't have the money, cannot be the situation, if I've understood the ministry right. But yet, there can be a situation where you wanted something, you were still searching, and I agree, I fully agree, and I concede, this whole mechanism of RFI and RFPs and everything else, other than giving away the story of what you're looking for, the particular permutation and combination of things that you want, also frustrates the process. You're doing one, then you're spending a whole year on it. You're doing the next, you're spending another year on it. You're doing the third one when you're going to those companies and saying, show me your product, I want to test it, which is demanded by the rule. And I have seen in the case of a particular variety of gun, it had to be tested in Thar, it had to be tested in peak summer in Thar, it had to be tested in peak winter in Nathula, it had to also be tested when you can approach the high altitudes in Daulat Beg Oldi. End of the day, you need 3 years, peak summer, peak winter, and when you can approach without monsoon to the high altitudes, and possibly even after the monsoon in our tri-junctions near Burma, Myanmar, Tibet, and India. So you end up spending, genuinely, and you might laugh saying, why is she spending so much time? We know all this, we've lived through this. But genuinely, that is one of the things on the basis of which that money which was given to you is probably going back, and end of the day, you're still doing legitimate work of testing, trying in different weather conditions, because if I can state this openly, India probably is the only country which buys each equipment to be able to fight a war in the desert, fight a war in the tropics, fight a war in the high altitude deserts, and also fight a war in cold mountains. Mountains which are so difficult to even fly through. So your helicopter is not bought for one purpose, that which can lift in that high altitude and that which can go through these little crevices and so on. So end of the day, the forces are spending legitimate time, but frustrating for somebody who has to account for, why haven't you bought this year? I can't answer. You know, you've spent 5 years, but what have you bought? Sorry, yes, I agree. But what's going on there? Genuinely, the kind of work which is required. But should it go through this process? Yes, the RFI and RFP, not just for the point of view of you will probably expose everything, every speculation which is India specific, but you also are going through systems which have to be adopted. The manufacturing country or the original equipment manufacturer is probably sitting in a very temperate climate. And I give you a very layman's example, and this of course many people in Navy would probably agree. When you go into Vikramaditya, particularly the boiler room where I have been, Vikramaditya after all was Gorshkov used by the Russians. It's fine for them to have a boiler room in my plus 50s, plus 60s for the Russians. But Indian boiler rooms at plus 60, fellows can't stay inside it half an hour, and we give them special allowances. Allowances are no good. You give them the allowance, but what happens to that individual? How long can you post him there? But can you design something where the boiler room can be maintained from some other, using technology, making them stand outside or do something? These are the kind of things in which I think most of the original manufacturers being outside of the country don't take into consideration situations which are typically Indian. And when you therefore get technologies, you're unable to tweak it to your satisfaction in all aspects. Whereas if you were to produce it in India with R&D, which is done in India, many of these ironical situations, after having paid huge amounts, can be addressed. So if I were to just sort of say the few steps that we take, one of the things, as I said, for the finance, the other long-term perspective planning kept flexible, and also making sure our officials are interacting with the industry so that R&D, where it is happening, serves the purpose of our forces. One other thing, for the first time, and I'm really surprised, I'm not claiming big things here, but I was really surprised, our defense attaches don't even report to the ministry. Once posted out, they're dealing with the embassy, they're dealing with the foreign service, they're dealing with the ambassador. But hang on. What's happening in the global world? Tell me at least every 6 months. Yeah, the report comes through the MEA. Very well, but why should it come through the MEA? You're after all a defense attaché. Tell me what's happening there. Tell me what kind of technologies are attracting the globe towards that country. Or tell me if that country needs some of the things that you produce here. Being a friendly country, I shouldn't have a problem selling them. So for the first time, we had to make it a point to say, DAs, please come here, at least once in a year to sit and consult as to what we should do. This is not to say that MEA is not doing that linkage between the MOD and MEA and the defense attaches. But a periodic report also helps those officials, those officers who have to do a plan for purchasing of equipments. So we have made sure that the DAs come. And has it made a difference? It started last year, and I can tell you for sure now the DAs understand. We're not making a marketing agent of the DA, but the DA should at least be, alerted to what is happening in different parts of the world as regards defense equipments. And therefore this is now, for the second time, we've had it last year during the Defense Expo, this year during the Air Show, we've had the defense attaches come. Tell us about what's happening in the world about defense purchases, different marketing, defense-related production, and so on. One of the things on which I'd like to end my little talk on the matter as an outsider, because all of you are experts who are sitting here, is the Make in India thing is not just for the captive Indian armed forces to keep buying from them. Make in India, whether it is through DRDO and industry which manufactures it, or the private sector, is also aimed at export to friendly countries. And I'm glad to say, you did talk about the integrated missile production plan, which has yielded a lot of results. Today, our missiles are so sought after by many countries. But of course, one has to maintain a very, very clear picture in one's mind, utmost secrecy, and also ensure that it doesn't fall in hands from where it can be misused. So a lot of thought and synergetic consultation happens between the MEA and the Ministry of Defense. But what I want to highlight here is there exists a market outside other than the Indian Armed Forces. So the one message that I take the example of HAL, I also take the example of many other units. I keep telling them, yes, you have a grievance about the Air Force not paying you in time, but there are also disputes about you not supplying in time. HAL, particularly on Tejas, a lot of discussion has happened during my period. We've increased their capacity, as was rightly referred, from 8 to 16 annually, but even with 16, our orders are waiting. 83 is what is before them. You can calculate the number of years it's going to take for them to supply on the basis of 16 per year for the 83 itself. And then, of course, you're going to have to look at the next generation of Tejas and so on. So that's a long-term thing. We'll all work that out. But the underlying point that we are placing before these organizations, whether they're producing missiles or aircrafts or helicopters, there is a market outside. A lot of countries are keen to have some kind of engagement with India, and with all things taken care of, due diligence complied with, they want to purchase from you. India has immense potential to be an exporter of defense equipment, whether it's aircraft, whether it's, and I can also say, even a shipbuilding, war shipbuilding capability is very well recognized outside. There are several countries which are saying, help us to give that capacity to ourselves. Would you not do it? So there's just a lot of demand. People do recognize we have that level reached in India. Only we have to be a lot more flexible, a lot more nimble, so that we can achieve those kind of heights. As a defense equipment supplier, we should be a trustworthy supplier. We cannot just do some negotiations and end of the day say probably we are unable to do it because somebody else will get angry if I give you this equipment. So these kind of things do dominate the discussion, but we are applying our mind. I'll constantly seek the support of Vivekananda International Foundation in as much as informing us to form and work on policy making on these sort of things. We are just at the cusp. We have a long way to go. Jai Hind.
Friends, you could see in the last few minutes when the Raksha Mantri was speaking that winds of change are beginning to blow. Now this is, I think, a great change that is already happening. And Madam, when you were speaking, I could see some of our veterans who are sitting here, there were smiles on their faces. Because these people have been asking for these things for a very long time, like the reform of the finance or the reform of defense planning. The defense diplomacy report is already with you. I'm sure it is being looked at. Defense exports we have been talking about a whole lot of for many years. And then of course we talked about the cyber command, cyber defense agency and cyber command, etc. The way the world is changing, I think we need to, as you said, we are doing catch-up, but this catch-up also has to be very quick. In fact, General Vij is here, General Sani, General Ahuja, last year they worked very hard and produced a number of papers, and some of which we sent to you. We also have them on our website, and many of these issues have been raised. So thank you very much for saying that these experts could perhaps interact with the officials and we could have more detailed discussions. and this would also give us guidance for our further work. We are not doing work only for the sake of doing work. We really want to help improve the system. And since many of them have come out of the system. So I think it was wonderful hearing you. And I would like to thank you. And I would like to also thank the chairman of the task forces and also the members of the task forces and all the distinguished people who are here today. And I think it's been a wonderful interaction. And late Admiral Nair, who was the chairman of the VIF until till he passed away in September, he was very keen that you should come here sometimes and interact with us, and I'm glad that we had an opportunity today. And it was a very good interaction. I know that you have to go for another meeting, otherwise we could have probably had some questions and answers. But thank you very much for taking time, and let's give a hand to the Raksha Mantri for thank you. Yeah.
सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः सर्वे सन्तु निरामया सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत्। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः।